Kyle had begun to wonder if the very ground beneath his feet had turned treacherous, for every time he dared to glimpse at a future with Claire, a future he believed would bring him peace, he encountered nothing but resistance and scorn. It started with furtive glances whenever he mentioned marriage, whispers in hallways that stung more than outright insults, and polite nods from friends that never blossomed into full-throated support. Why, he asked himself one gray afternoon, did people seem so eager to squelch his happiness? What unseen fault lay in the woman he loved that made everyone else recoil? Driven by a mixture of frustration and sorrow, Kyle resolved to uncover the roots of this opposition. He thought first of Jack, his uncle, his mentor at Jabot, who had offered cautious approval of his relationship with Claire, tempered by business concerns and the weight of family expectations. Jack's blessing should have mattered most, and for a fleeting moment, Kyle felt buoyed. Yet even that support had come with caveats, hesitant congratulations, reminders to think carefully, and a pointed suggestion that Claire's background carried risks he couldn't quite define. And then there was Diane. Diane's disapproval had always been more personal, more insidious. As his mother, she held sway over his deepest emotions, and her most subtle barbs cut him to the quick. Kyle recalled with vivid clarity the look in her eyes the day Claire had brought her homemade pie to the Chancellor estate, a look that was neither surprise nor curiosity, but calculated disdain. It was Diane who had, Kyle suspected, orchestrated much of the discord. At first, he had blamed coincidence, assuming that strong personalities simply clashed. But the more he observed, the whispered phone calls, the strategic silences whenever Claire's name came up, the more he realized that someone was determined to drive a wedge between them. It was a dreadful thought, that his own mother, the woman who had once comforted him through childhood fears and teenage insecurities, could be plotting against the woman he intended to love for a lifetime. It must have been that realization, raw and painful, that kept him awake the night he decided to follow the thread of suspicion wherever it led. He began to comb through Diane's recent meetings, the guest list of her charity gala, and the receipts for large transfers from her private accounts. Nothing jumped out immediately, until he noticed a substantial payment to Audra Charles's firm, an amount significant enough to cover a high-stakes legal retainer, yet not remotely justified by the modest consulting Diane's social calendar demanded. Curious, Kyle waited for an opportunity. The chance came sooner than he anticipated. Diane had arranged a late afternoon conference call with Audra in her private office at Chancellor Industries. Kyle, pressing his ear to the door, heard his mother's clipped voice congratulate Audra on a job well done, and paid close attention as Audra's silky tone responded, "Thank you, Mrs. Chancellor. Your mother's concerns are my priority, and I intend to ensure that Mr. Abbott and Miss Newman understand the folly of pursuing marriage at this time." When Diane's voice hardened, "Make sure he never sees this coming," audible only in stifled grit, Kyle felt his chest tighten so fiercely that he feared he might not breathe. He pressed closer, catching the final exchange. "My fee is, as you know, non-refundable," Audra said, "and I've negotiated on your behalf, Mrs. Chancellor, to secure the best outcome. Mr. Abbott and Miss Newman will be forced to reconsider." At that moment, Kyle's world shattered. The law firm he had trusted implicitly, the family he had revered, even his own mother's love, all of it now seemed entangled in a web of manipulation. Tears welled in his eyes as guilt and fury warred within him. How could Audra betray the woman she had once called a client and friend? How could Diane stoop to such cruelty to protect him, of all people, from his own happiness? And worst of all, how had they underestimated him so profoundly that they believed he would never discover the truth? He retreated from the door, each step echoing in the empty hallway like a tolling bell. In the solitude of his car, he sank against the leather seat and let the tears flow freely. Every sob was a mixture of heartbreak and relief, that at last, he knew the names behind the whispers, the payments behind the lies. The discovery did not bring him peace, it lit a fire of righteous anger. He thought of Claire, unaware of the conspiracy unfolding around her, and he resolved that nothing, neither familial pressure nor legal subterfuge, would stand between them again. The next morning, with puffy eyes but unshakable determination, Kyle confronted Audra at her law offices. He laid out the bank statements, the dates, the amounts, all the evidence he'd painstakingly collected. Audra's usual composure faltered for the briefest instant when she realized she'd been unmasked. Her carefully measured apology, "I'm sorry you feel betrayed," felt as hollow as the transactions she'd executed. He demanded to know exactly how much she'd been paid, what instructions Diane had given, and whether Victor had also enlisted her services to undermine his relationship. With that revelation, Audra's refusals crumbled. In a cold, defeated whisper she admitted it all: Mrs. Chancellor's fee, an additional retainer from Victor to manage the situation, and her own willingness to accept the sum because it was too substantial to decline. Kyle's heartbreak hardened into clarity. He ended the meeting without fury, simply stating, "Your loyalty should have been to the truth, not to bribes." He left Audra's office, his mind focused on the one person whose trust mattered, Claire. He would tell her everything: the betrayal, the plot, his mother's duplicity, and then he would ask her to stand with him, not just against a meddling mother or a scheming lawyer, but against the idea that their love could be controlled by anyone outside the bond they shared. And so Kyle wept again that night, but this time the tears were not purely of sorrow. They were the first tears of release, the sorrow of a naive trust betrayed, the anger at the cruelty of those who should have protected him, and above all, the fierce hope that at last, with the plot exposed and the conspirators unmasked, he and Claire could chart their own course, undeterred by any force that dared to deny them their future together. Kyle sank to his knees in the quiet enclave of his office, shoulders heaving as the tears he'd fought so long to hold back finally escaped. He could scarcely believe the cruelty he'd overheard between his own mother and Audra, two women he had trusted with his happiness. "How could you do this to me?" he whispered hoarsely into the empty room, both heartbreak and fury fighting for dominance in his chest. In that moment, he vowed retribution. Diane would pay for this betrayal. He would strip her of her role at Jabot, he would reveal her treachery to Jack and Claire, and he would never, ever forgive her. But as the storm of anger washed over him, his breathing slowed and he forced himself to rise. Standing before the cityscape beyond his window, Kyle ran a trembling hand through his hair and reminded himself to pause, to think before he acted on blind rage. After all, Diane was no villain born of malice. She was his mother, a woman who had sacrificed and cared for him since childhood. There had to be more to her scheme than the simple desire to see him alone. He thought back to every word Diane had ever spoken about Claire, her concerns about vulnerability, her wary glances when Claire's name surfaced, the protective edge in her voice at family dinners. Diane had insisted, time and again, that Claire's kindness was a veneer. That beneath it lay a history of impulsiveness and scandals Kyle could scarcely fathom. Perhaps, in Diane's mind, she was saving him from heartache, not inflicting it. He realized with a shock that his own stubbornness had blinded him to the possibility that his mother's interference, however misguided, had been born of love rather than malice. Kyle took a deep breath and let the cool air steady him. No mother who truly loved her son would willingly destroy his prospects without believing she had no other choice. Diane must have believed, with all her heart, that Claire would hurt him, that the risk of his heartbreak eclipsed the promise of his happiness. That understanding did not excuse the deception, it did not erase the sting of betrayal, but it gave him context. Diane's fear for his well-being had driven her to a drastic solution. Hiring Audra to sow doubt between him and Claire when words alone could not sway him. In the soft glow of the room, Kyle steadied his resolve. He would speak to Jack and Claire, but not with a vengeful tongue. He would lay out the facts plainly, without bitterness or recrimination, so they could see Diane's motives for what they truly were, the misguided actions of a mother clinging to her son's safety. And then, when the truth was fully revealed, he would confront Diane herself. With compassion rather than condemnation, so she could understand that her love did not justify betrayal. A fierce determination rose within him. He would protect his future with Claire, yes, but he would also not abandon the woman who had given him life. He would demand honesty and respect from Diane, and he would insist that she recognize Claire's integrity for herself rather than through schemes and bribes. Only then could they rebuild trust. Mother and son, united not by secrecy, but by the shared bond of love and understanding that no amount of deception could ever sever. Claire guided her car along the winding driveway that led to the sprawling Newman Ranch, the early morning sun gilding the tops of the rolling fields in gold. In her lap rested a single chocolate croissant, still warm from the bakery, its delicate layers promising a moment of sweetness amid the gravity of the day's conversation. As she pulled up beside the long row of white fences, she paused to smooth the soft brown curls at her nape, took a deep breath of the crisp spring air, and reminded herself why she'd come. This was more than a courtesy visit, it was an act of honesty and respect toward the grandfather who had raised her loves with a quiet sense of duty and a heart always open to family. Gathering her courage, she crossed the dew-kissed lawn and lifted the heavy brass latch on the garden gate. Victor Newman stood amid the neat rows of budding rose bushes, his posture as straight and unyielding as the man she had known since childhood. Yet when he turned and saw the delicate pastry in her outstretched hand, the corners of his stern mouth softened. "Claire," he said, voice deep with surprise and warmth, "a chocolate croissant?" "My favorites." She smiled, relief flickering through her chest as she offered him the gift. He accepted it with a small bow of his head, gently cradling the croissant as if it were more precious than any rare artifact. "I thought you might need something sweet today," she said, brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead. "And I wanted to see how you're doing." He gestured to a wrought iron bench set under a blossoming magnolia. "Sit," he invited, stepping back to give her space. As she settled onto the cool metal, she felt the weight of what she needed to say pressing upon her. Victor took his time, savoring a bite of the croissant, his eyes never leaving her face. Finally, he swallowed and folded his hands behind his back. "I understand you haven't cancelled your plan to move in with Kyle," he said, voice calm but laced with disappointment. Claire drew in a steadying breath. "Grandpa, I convinced Kyle that now is not the right time. After everything that's happened with the family, the secrets, the deceptions, I want to be open with you before I take that next step." His expression flickered, a mixture of relief, pride, and the hint of an old warrior weary from battles both personal and corporate. "I appreciate that," he said quietly. "I was worried that you might feel rushed, or that you didn't have all the information you needed to make such a big decision." Claire leaned forward, earnestness shining in her eyes. "Your approval matters so much to me," she confessed. "I love him, and I want him in our lives, yours, mine, and the rest of the family. But I couldn't in good conscience move into the carriage house without being honest about everything that's happened." Victor nodded slowly, as though weighing her words. "I told you once that trust is the foundation of every Newman partnership," he reminded her. "If you build your life on anything less, the whole structure will crumble." Claire smiled, feeling the tension in her shoulders ease for the first time in weeks. "That's why I stopped Kyle from moving in right away," she said. He understood, and he agreed it was the right choice. "But now I need your help for something else." Her grandfather's eyes narrowed with curiosity. "What is it?" he asked. "I'm planning a birthday celebration for Aunt Nikki," Claire explained, her voice bright with excitement. "She's been so devoted to our family and our community. I want to do something unforgettable, something that reflects the generosity she's shown all of us." Victor's stern features softened into a proud smile. "You're thinking of charity auctions," he guessed, remembering the successful events she'd orchestrated as a student. "Or a gala under the stars?" Claire's head nodded eagerly. "Yes, tables dressed in white linen, centerpieces of blush roses, a performance by the Philharmonic under twinkling lights. And a silent auction of rare family heirlooms and fine art, with proceeds to benefit the Newman Children's Scholarship Fund." She paused to let her vision settle between them. "I want Aunt Nikki to feel how loved she is, to know that her life's work has made a difference." Victor closed his eyes briefly, savoring the picture she painted, then opened them with a soft determination. You can count on me, he declared. I'm proud of you, Claire, proud of the woman you've become. A flush of warmth spread through Claire's chest. Thank you, she whispered. I thought it would mean the world to her if we did this together. Victor swept a hand through his silver hair, as if brushing aside all doubts. Then let's get started, he said firmly. I'll handle the funding and the logistics, catering, security, the orchestra. You focus on the details that only you can bring to life. Claire laughed, her heart light for the first time in months. I'll start drafting the guest list tonight, she promised. And I'll need your advice on a few key donors. He nodded, already reaching for his phone to summon his chief of staff. As they rose to leave the garden, Claire paused to look across the fields, where the sunlight glinted off distant rooftops. I feel like we're finally on the same page, she murmured. Victor placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Family, he said simply, is always worth the effort. Hand in hand, grandfather and granddaughter walked back toward the ranch house, united in purpose and bound by the honesty that had finally bridged the gap between them. And in that moment, Claire knew that whatever the future held, be it weddings, birthdays, triumphs, or trials, they would face it together, with integrity, love, and the unwavering support of a family that had chosen the truth above all else.